Hey, this is Josh Hewitt, the host of the Straight to the Bar Gym Chats. This is Gym Chat number 240, and tonight we are live with Karsten Jensen, and Karsten is going to be talking about periodization. So he is an expert on this topic and has literally written the book on the subject. So he's going to tell you a little bit about his book, I'm sure, on this topic as well. But we want to get into it right from the beginning and the basics of periodization and really understand what it's all about. Thanks again for joining us, Karsten. For those of you, for those people who are watching who aren't familiar with who you are, you've been on the show before, but can you give people a little bit of a background about how you got into coaching and how you got sort of, moved in to Canada, started your business here? You have quite a story around that. Do you mind sharing a little bit about it?
Yeah, just a little bit. I was born and raised in Denmark, a small country in northern Europe, and I came to Canada in 2007. In Denmark, I started as a tennis coach. So I'm 45 now, and I've been a coach since I was 13. The first 10 years as a tennis coach, and the last 20 years as a strength coach. How did I get into it? Give me that question one more time. I lost track there.
Just wondering sort of how did this journey? I guess you were coaching in tennis, and that's sort of how you got your foot in the door in the industry. What led you to your coaching profession? You do strength coaching, and what brought you here to Canada to explore your business
the
over
reason
here?
I became a strength coach was that second year in university, I studied exercise physiology in the University of Copenhagen. We had track and field, which I really enjoyed. But I was extremely slow, which I also wrote a little bit about in the bio on our website.
Okay.
Actually, my first clocked 100 meters is 14.28 seconds.
Okay.
Which is really, really slow for anybody who would know.
Okay.
So I started to become interested in what it takes to make a tortoise into a hare, or at least a faster tortoise.
Yeah.
That was kind of what really interested me in the beginning.
Yeah. Okay, that's cool.
Yeah,
go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, one of the first books that I read on it was Tudor Bomber's Theory and Methodology of Training, which they had on the library.
Yes.
And that was around 91 or 92.
Yeah.
And so people talks about they don't know what to do. I just remember one day over a short period of time, I just knew as a gut feeling that I was going to be a strength coach.
Awesome. And now you're helping tortoises here become hares too.
I try. Yeah.
Excellent. So Karsten's been in the industry for quite a while now, and he's doing seminars with different organizations and presenting on a number of different topics, and written a couple of books as well along the way. But today we want to focus on periodization. So let's get right into it. We're starting a little late. Sorry for those who are watching this live. We do have the Q&A open. I'll just make sure that is here at the side. So there is a Q&A for those of you who are watching this live. Feel free to pipe in any questions. We had a power outage here, so just got the power back on, and we're glad to have Karsten hanging on for us. Can you just let us know a basic definition of what periodization is, if someone who is not familiar with it, if wanted to understand it in layman's terms? What is it, and how would you define it?
Yeah. So everybody knows what classification means, or categorization means, and periodization is a similar word. So categorization meaning putting things into categories. Periodization meaning putting things into periods.
Okay.
It literally means a division into periods. And specifically for training, a good definition, which is kind of a merge of a lot of different textbook definitions, is a different periods with different goals, structures, and content of the training program. That's the shortest definition that we operate with.
Excellent.
Yeah.
And obviously you're a proponent of periodization in some form. What would you say are the primary benefits of using a form of periodization? Why is it important?
Yeah, I recently, because I teach it, I continuously think about how it can be communicated in a simpler and more clear way. And And one viewpoint is, if anybody wants to reach their true potential for any aspect of strength, speed, power, and endurance, I think everybody will agree that it will take years of training and good training. And studies on periodization, they show that periodization is needed in training periods that are beyond 4 weeks. Meaning, if you train beyond 4 weeks, there's literally no way you can get around periodization.
So you're not going to continue to make linear progress just by progressively increasing. Like you can't do a linear progression for much more than 4 weeks without plateauing in some respects. Is that kind of what you're talking about?
That's more or less it. It also ties into the definition of periodization, is that periodization is to taking a longer period and divide it into shorter periods with different goals, structures, and contents of the training program. If I only train 4 weeks, there's not a need for creating more than one period. So, 4 weeks and shorter, there's no need for periodization for beginners.
Right. Okay.
But as soon as you go beyond that, and literally, if you think back to the definition, if you ever change anything about the training program, you are creating periodization, because then you have a new period, and at least with a new structure and new content of the training program. So one way to think about it is that unless you always do the exact same thing, you are periodizing. And then the next logical question is it effective or is it not effective? And since it's kind of like the since you're doing it anyway, you might as well learn an effective way of doing it, however that way is, right?
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Exactly. It would seem obvious, although we see a lot of people use the same thing that doesn't work on and on, expecting different results, right?
Yes.
So would an example be if someone were to, like, for example, a program I'm doing where I'll increase number of sets and I'll decrease repetitions and load over a period of weeks, that's a form of periodization, I suppose, correct?
That would be a form of periodization. In the recent book that I wrote for the Danish Sport Federation, one of the tasks was to compare known periodization systems. And I looked at a lot of different research, and they very, very often come out with conflicting results.
Okay.
Partly because if you take, for example, I took about 5 to 10 different studies on linear periodization, which is where, in general, intensity and volume changes in a linear fashion, and changes to intensity and volume is applied after a particular number of weeks. These studies were all different, meaning that they all examined changes after a different number of weeks. And the scientists, they continue to study different versions of essentially the same periodization system, and that's one reason why they keep coming out differently. But what we ended up doing was that we ended up breaking all these systems down in 6, that's how we see it right now, main characteristics. And one of these characteristics is how variation is applied.
Okay.
So, and variation can be applied in a linear way, which is like a gradual linear increase in intensity, and decrease in volume is like the classic way of doing it. But I really don't I don't think in those terms that much anymore, for that particular reason, because it kind of locks you in. So I think more, what's the pattern of change in volume and intensity, and I'll think about it that way.
Okay, so what would be, I'm sure there's so many different forms, but can you give an example, maybe one example or a couple of examples of forms of periodization in a general sense that you think are effective, or just so people sort of have an understanding of a popular form of periodization?
Yeah. So I almost don't want to answer the question that way, because forms of periodization, it becomes very rigid, and it also is very much based on your training background. Because, for example, one of the things that the research point out, and one of the really good researchers on periodization is Michael Stone from the States. In my opinion, very, very knowledgeable and have written a lot about it. One of the things he points out is that the beginner will not need a lot of variation in order to make progress.
Right.
And he uses that as an explanation for how a linear pattern of change in volume and intensity, meaning, for example, that you do 3 sets of 10 for 3 weeks, then you change it to 3 sets of 5 for 3 weeks, and then 3 sets of 3 for 3 weeks. That's enough variation for the beginner.
This might be an example why the starting strength program could work for people who are just getting into training for a while, and then he recommends, okay, now you got to go and take it to the next level with a different approach.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then another pattern of change in volume and intensity is what's have been dubbed daily undulating periodization, where the repetition zone in resistance training changes significantly within the same week of training. So there will be, for example, sets of 20 on the Monday, sets of 12 on the Wednesday, and sets of 6 on the Friday. According to the researchers, the advantage of that is the variation when you compare it to doing the same rep range for all your workouts for 3 weeks in a row. The disadvantage is, however, that you get very little work in the same repetition range.
Right.
So they also believe that for example, when you reach intermediate to advanced stages, that pattern will not give you enough stimulation on your target ability, and that leads you into some of the Russian systems, the conjugate periodization and the block periodization. Yeah.
Westside sort of adapted their approach on the conjugated thing, I think, right? Westside, Louis Simmons sort of took some elements of that, or?
Yeah, he did it. In my opinion, and there will probably be a lot of disagreement on that, is that if we compare his writings to the book Super Training,
right,
which is to my knowledge, one of the single most comprehensive resources on this, including there's also last year Elite FTS posted a report by a guy called Tom Myslinski on the conjugate periodization, which is very, very comprehensive as well. You there? Hey, Josh.
We've reconnected. Oh, are you there still? Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Okay, let's continue.
Yeah.
Okay. And we're back. Oh my gosh. That was just a pure internet connection issue.
Oh,
anyway, you know what? Let's see if this will get included in the same broadcast here.
Yes.
So, thanks for those of you who are still tuned in with us. Let's see if the Q&A is still fired up here. Yes, it is. Good. Okay. So yes, you were just about to. We were referencing super training, and then you mentioned Elite FTS also has. What was it you're going to mention?
They had a report. They had a report last year. They probably still have it on the site. Called the Conjugate System by a gentleman called Tom Myslinski, and I read that as part of the research for one of the books that you mentioned. And it's some kind of study project for him. He's like a PhD or a master degree student somewhere in the States. It was very well written, very informative. But the conjugate meaning it's the same word as in conjugate linoleic acids.
Right.
So it's kind of taking blocks of training and sequencing them in such a way that the previous block creates optimal conditions for training adaptations to happen in the next block.
Okay.
Louis Simmons done that with exercises mainly. The way that I see it, he talks a lot. That's the first time I heard about periodization of exercise. That was from his writing. Within each block in the conjugate periodization, the way it's described in super training, the key word is unidirectional loading, meaning they will essentially focus all the training on maximal strength, for example,
right,
with minor changes in intensity to avoid overtraining and to facilitate the training effect.
Okay.
But essentially, all the training is within the same training zone. If you look at volumes and intensity in the West side, at least the way I understand it, they combine maximal strength, dynamic effort, which is
and
power training,
and repetition effort, bodybuilding sort of stuff,
So interestingly enough, that approach, that pattern of variation is very, very similar to daily undulating periodization, as we just spoke about before.
Okay, yeah. So it's almost like they kind of combined a little bit of the daily undulating and with the conjugated. It's not purely one form or the other.
No.
And what you're saying is you were hesitant to reference one form of periodization because you're saying it might be a little bit too rigid. You know what might be useful for people if there was a resource or some sort of book on flexible periodization, so people could.
Yeah, I have one right here.
Oh wow! What a coincidence!
What a coincidence! So this is my main book on periodization called the Flexible Periodization Method, and it is called that because one of the things I did before writing it was that I had read some of the research comparing linear versus nonlinear periodization, and I also, and this is like 10 years ago, seen that they came out with different results, and you realize that it's not about one or the other. It's when is a linear pattern best for this particular athlete, and when is a nonlinear pattern best for this particular athlete. So instead of choosing between the known periodization system, I have created a way here to literally create any pattern of change in volume and intensity within the same system.
Okay.
So the way that I describe it in the workshops is I compare it to a DJ manipulating the buttons on the console to make the music sound just right. So here you can turn up, and particularly the way that this is done is by how you combine the fundamental training methods within the same week of training.
Okay, excellent.
And
so
that's described in section 2 and in what's referred to as first choice structures.
So would this make your periodization program more individualized to each person?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I experienced a funny thing a while ago. I don't think I told you. To one of the courses that I teach for Certified Professional Trainers Network, a Canadian level shot putter came. And we talked about training, and I don't remember if I asked him or he offered me to show his training program, but I could see who had trained his strength coach.
Okay.
So I said, did Coach X train your strength coach? Because this program had the signature of this particular coach. There's no reason for mentioning his name.
Yes.
Where obviously it should have been a shot putter program. And I thought after that, and I feel this is accurate, that when the flexible periodization method is done right, if you create a program for two different athletes with different needs, there should be no resemblance except for potentially the training template. It will be different exercises, different volumes, intensities, methods. You should only recognize a program created with the flexible periodization method on the result that is produced by the athlete who trains with the program.
Okay, excellent. That's a good point, and that's a unique one. I don't think people don't usually use that as one of the prerequisites for putting together a periodization program, that it should be more individualized. They want to follow a rule book, basically, or a guideline that's very rigid, which typically, because this works, I'm going to always do it this way for all my athletes, kind of thing, right?
Yes, yeah.
Now, we mentioned Bomba was the first time you started hearing about periodization, and that's the same with me because it was referenced in school and university and everything as well. Where do you think the idea of, or is it hard to say, that where the idea of periodization, where it was coined as periodization for sport, for training, where do you think it originated? Was it Bomba? Was it Russians came up with this? Or is it hard to say, really?
I think it's hard to say. There's a really good coverage in Super Training as well about the historic aspects of it that described, and this is also worth taking into account, that Sif had a very close connection with the Russians, spent time with Merkushansky,
Yeah.
and describes that some of it originated about the turn of the previous century, about 1900,
Mm-hmm.
and it grew in detail throughout Europe and the United States through the past century. Bomba also has a really good coverage in theory and methodology of training, tracing it all the way back to ancient Greece. A coach called Philostratus, working with 4-day plans with a particular pattern of change in effort over 4 days that then is repeated. Something that would, it would make sense to do that still.
Yeah.
So the idea of I'm not sure who used the word periodization first.
Yeah.
I've heard that Bomba is credited with it, but there's a lot of I spoke about that earlier today with a colleague, and there's a lot of competition between the authors of different systems.
Yeah.
And they don't necessarily appreciate each other's works, I think.
Yeah, unfortunately. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, great. And I don't want to take a whole lot more of your time, but just a quick question about we're talking.
We can just take all the questions there is. It's good.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
So one was regarding athletes, because we're talking a lot about training athletes and of the athletes' goals. So the question is basically on here about general fitness versus athletes. Like, is this just for athletes or specific performance-related training goals? What about someone who's just interested in fat loss or just physique transformation or general fitness? That sort of like a gym rat versus an athlete. You know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah,
is there still an application? Should we still be looking at having an individualized periodization program, or what's your opinion?
Absolutely. I can say there's two situations where someone would not benefit from periodization. One is if they plan to train less than 4 weeks, as we spoke later on, or if their intensity is of whatever they're doing is so low that they're really not stressing the body, meaning that they're just maintaining. To give you an example of that, one of my reserve grandfather from Denmark, he's 95, and he walks and he does joint mobility drills. He doesn't need to periodize.
Right. Okay, got it.
Right, but anybody who wants to create any kind of change in their bodies, they need to train with enough intensity that it creates a training stimulus that is stressful. And when they do that, they will need to periodize by waving up volume and intensity. And and like a classic way is to take some form of active rest after 2 or 3 weeks of developmental training, again depending on recovery ability and various factors. But everybody should definitely do that. And it's one of the important points is that it does not have to be complicated. There can be a lot of decisions to make, but it can be done in a very simple way. If you are yourself or your trainer change just 1 or 2 factors about your program in a sensible way, you're applying periodization.
Awesome.
Yeah,
that's good. I think I
want to add one thing to that. On occasion, there would be articles on the internet saying that periodization doesn't work. Periodization is not for fitness clients; it's only for athletes. What is interesting to note there is that the definition of periodization that is used there is the periodization as it was to some extent developed in the former Eastern Bloc, and Sif writes about this too, and he points out very interestingly that the development of periodization was affected by communist philosophy, and particularly they did not want human emotion, so they made programs based on the assumption that the rate of progress would be fixed, and the athlete would always have a fixed amount of energy to train. And obviously, even for professional athletes, it doesn't work that way.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because I was going to ask you about biofeedback, and some people say I don't periodize because I just go by how I feel that day in the gym.
Yeah.
That whole trained by the but I mean that opens up a whole other topic. But that's a good point. You can't always fit it into a rigid plan without taking into account. So how do you account for that?
No, so Sif also talks about that. It's a really a phenomenal book. We come back to it, and the term is the two terms for it, and they're pretty much the same thing. It means one is cybernetic periodization, and another is autoregulated periodization, and it means that you modify the program based on daily readiness and progress.
Mm-hmm.
What then becomes the key is how you modify it. And here you want to think about if anybody wants to develop, now just say maximal strength, for example, you have to train for maximal strength for a certain amount of workouts and a certain amount of weeks consecutively. Otherwise, no change is going to happen.
Okay.
The body needs a certain amount of training sessions to adapt to a certain stimuli. So if I think, and this would be the bad example, that I don't feel like training for maximal strength today. I want to train stability on a Bosa ball, or I don't feel like squatting with the bar today. I feel like running instead. That is going to lead to absolutely nothing, because you're going like one training session in one direction, one training session in another direction. But if you think, okay, I can't do the maximal strength program that I planned, what is the closest thing that I can do to what I planned? And you may end up with, let's reduce the load with 20%, and try to lift faster instead. Or let's reduce the amount of sets from 5 to 2. So you modify, but it's literally the same direction. So you're going in the same direction, but you can weigh back and forth.
Excellent.
That's an absolute key.
That's great. That's good. I think we provided a really nice framework for people to digest the idea of periodization without it seeming like it's too huge or complex of a topic for them to get into, and that makes it also approachable for people who are just like, well, I'm just going to follow the muscle mag thing because I don't get this, but I don't get periodization. That's great. So we already covered a lot.
Another like viewpoint on periodization is, now you say the magazines, is that periodization can also be viewed as systematic program hopping. You know, like the term program hopping, like people will try one workout. And if you do that in a systematic way, for example, looking for, one way is to, okay, let me try a low volume program and work on that until as long as I make progress and I feel I start stalling, I take a week off and let me hop to a high volume program.
Right.
Or any other aspect. But you stay in the same program for as long as you make progress. And if you make no progress, it's probably not about the program. It might be your nutrition or recovery or attitude or
yeah, exactly.
Not the actual program. Yeah.
Good point. Now, what we've been doing, I've been trying to do at the end of each show now, is to get some resources that we can recommend to people who are watching so they can look into it a little bit more. We already covered a couple during the chat so far. So, I mean, definitely I've taken a look at, you were kind enough to give me a copy of the Flexible Periodization a few years ago. So that's definitely one. I'm going to put a link to that below. Definitely recommend you check that out. The benefit of this, because we talked about Bomba's books and Super Training with Mel Sif, the benefit of Karsten's book is that he's referenced so many other resources, put it in a much more digestible form, and it's something you can individualize yourself. So if you want a resource, and I'm obviously, okay, you're my guest, I'm pushing your product a bit, but
thank you.
As far as something that if people want to find out about this and have it that they can apply to themselves, this is, I think, is a really good place to start. But what other books outside of this would you recommend? Do you think people, because I'll be honest, I have Super Training, and I take peeks at it for different things I want to look at. It's not an easy read.
It's a challenging read.
Yeah. So what resources would you recommend?
Another really, really good website is called Ultimate Athletes Concepts.
Okay.
It's a guy who's called Joseph Johnson, and he literally publishes all the Russian books. And for example, there are 2 books on block periodization, which is another of the main forms of periodization.
Okay, good. And then what was Bomba's book that you were referencing?
It's called Theory and Methodology of Training.
Okay, great. And you'd recommend that if someone wants to get into a little bit more about periodization?
That has been really helpful to me. Really helpful to me.
Okay, excellent.
It teaches you a lot about the sequencing. Yeah.
Good, excellent. So what about if people wanted to get in touch with you or wanted to get your help, your services, either in person or online, to help them put together a program or take their training to the next level? How can they approach you with regards to that?
You can, anyone who's interested in that can email me through the website called www.yes2strength.com.
Okay.
There's a contact form in the bottom of the website.
Okay, and
that
one,
goes directly to me, and I'll reply within a couple of days.
excellent. And I'll put the link to that as well. So for anyone watching, definitely check that out. And if people just have questions or just want to connect with you to sort of follow up on what we talked about, you're cool with receiving emails on that as well?
Absolutely.
Excellent.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good.
Like talking about this stuff. It's exciting.
Yeah, that's the cool thing about it. It's not work when you like it so much, right? You can really get into it.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thanks a lot for joining us. I thought this is a great chat. I learned a little bit as well, so that was terrific. I always enjoy these discussions. We should definitely do it again. Let's keep in touch and come up with some other topics to share.
Yeah.
And thanks for your patience today. I mean, like I was saying, when you blacked out there for a little bit, I was still online for a touch. So I had power outs and everything else here. It's exciting. But we got some good information out. Again, check the links down below, and thanks again, Karsten. We'll touch base with you soon.
Thank you, Josh.
Good, and we will be back next Wednesday with another gym chat, so make sure that you tune in for that again. It'll be at 8 p.m. same time, and until then, stay strong.